Namaste, greetings. Welcome to Suburb 5 Point Conversation. It's a talk show where we invite subject experts for a candid conversation. Our today's guest is Aditi Mishra, a renowned academician with over 35 years of rich experience working and mentoring students, teachers, and of course, hand holding parents. She has lot to say on issues like underage driving, her learnings during corona, and post pandemic changes that teachers have learned. Let's meet and greet Miss Aditi Mishra. A very warm welcome, Aditi ji, to Suburb 5 Point Conversation. And thank you so much for joining us today. Post pandemic, for last 2 years, it's been a very difficult time, and especially for teachers. Now, those who've evolved from a classroom model teaching to now online, and again with schools partially reopening, I think both the models, what I heard, are simultaneously working. So, how have the teachers evolved from the offline to the online and the current model, what it is?
Thank you, Vinita. Thank you for calling me as part of this conversation. I must say, I think that two, three groups of people who have actually been frontline workers are healthcare workers, the armed forces, and teachers. But teachers have remained largely unsung. So I would like to, through your channel, applaud teachers across the world for the kind of work they've done. So when the pandemic was first sort of announced, so to say, and the lockdown began, the biggest challenge for all of us teachers was how do we reach out to our children? What should we do now that the children don't lose out? There are no learning gaps. So automatically we wanted to move online, but we didn't know how. So on the 19th of March, I still remember feeling absolute panic that what do we do? And at that time, by the way, I thought the pandemic or the lockdown was for 2 weeks, maximum 4 weeks. And I thought that by the middle of April 2020, we'll be back in school. So we quickly started training ourselves, me included, because if I have to reach out to teachers and children, I must know what I have to do online. So whether it was Zoom or Google Meet or Microsoft, we had to train ourselves. And before we made fools of ourselves in front of children, we wanted to first get our own feet in the space. So from my room, I would tell teachers to go into various classrooms and I would try having a meeting with them. They would start a class and see that whether they were audible or they were doing the right thing, because half the time you don't know when to mute your mic, when to unmute yourself, how do you start using the soft board. So teachers have evolved the world over from the regular offline classroom into the online space. It's been tremendous learning because remember, now you have a wider audience. You have the parents sitting there.
Correct.
Earlier, the parent got a second hand view of what was happening in class through the child. Now, the parent is sitting there and watching.
Correct.
And again, I must say that most parents have been extremely appreciative of the teachers. They've seen the hard work. It was very visible, it was palpable. And they have, across India, most principals are saying that parents are very, very happy with the kind of online teaching that was happening wherever it was happening. I, of course, joked and I said, hopefully, in the future, parent teacher meetings will be happier spaces with parents now understanding how difficult the teaching learning process has been. From the online space where we became very comfortable in it, now we are aces at making Zoom calls and Zoom conversations and Google and whatever. Now comes the time when classes are partially opening. So we have either the choice of teacher teaching twice, that she teaches an online class and then an offline class, or we go hybrid, where the teacher teaches an offline class and the same class is streamed to the children at home. That process is right now on in most schools.
In DPS also?
In DPS across the country, because that's the only way forward. Because teachers have a regular day at school from say 8 to 1. And if they go home and they expect to teach again from 3 to 7 or 8, it's just not fair. It will not remain the kind of attractive proposition it is for a lot of women who want to work and look after a home. So the only way out is having it hybrid, having a blended learning model where the classes are offline and yet they are being sent home online. It has been a struggle because sometimes the network doesn't work. Sometimes the child at home loses electricity. So those issues we are still grappling with. In fact, there's a tremendous need to refurbish our own internet systems within schools. which I think many schools are undertaking right now. And I think within the Shera break from the 18th, 19th onwards, we'll have a much more robust system across all the schools. And whatever problems are being faced will be sorted out, because all of us are also working together. A lot of collaboration,
Learning.
Schools learn from each other. So I said this, I had this problem, so try not to do that. Somebody else tells me, oh, we tried this, it didn't work out, so don't even go there. So we are learning from each other's mistakes and not waiting to reinvent the wheel in our own way.
Correct. So back to school campaign, isn't it on whether so that the teachers, they don't have to actually teach twice, or this hybrid model comes back to the normalcy of a classroom model?
So that's a tricky one, Vinita, because I think we cannot force a parent to feel safe. We feel safe because I think this is now my part of my attire. We have to have the mask on. We have trained our children adequately to sanitize themselves and keep distance. But if a parent is still feeling nervous, I don't think it is in my capacity to try and tell them don't feel nervous. And yet I see the beginnings of change, because what we began in August as a class of 5 grew to 10 in September, and today we have almost 19-20 children inside the class. So it is about, in some classes, almost 50% children coming, almost 60% children coming. So it will happen slowly, because from what I hear from experts, whether it's healthcare workers or scientists, that possibly some form of corona is here to stay. So it may either reach an endemic stage, or it may become like the common cough and cold. So you take precautions and it will come and it will hit you and it will go away. So if that is going to happen, how long are we supposed to stay at home? So these are decisions which have to be taken collectively by the community, not just by schools, not just by parents. I think the government will step in at one point and say, okay, now no more online class. Everybody has to come offline. Okay, you cannot all come together. So let there be a 3-day working week: Monday, Wednesday, Friday for one set of children, and Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday for another set of children. But something has to happen that will encourage parents to now stop this online classes and get them back into school.
So now the classes have begun for middle school up till 12th, or what is it?
It was from middle school to up to 12th in August. Then we were allowed to call in class 4 and 5, and now it's from class 1 to class 12 as of now, today.
So there are another set of people who say that children are actually going out for all parties and movies, and pajama parties are happening, and malling is there. So aren't we really seeing a distinction in their judgment of parents?
So that dichotomy is something which parents have to answer. Honestly, I mean, I cannot enter their homes, but in case parents think that malls are safe and schools are not, then they should just rethink, because I doubt if any child is sitting at home all the time. If they are, then my apologies to start with, but I'm sure children are moving out, they're meeting friends, they're meeting relatives, they're going for, like you said, pajama parties, they're stayovers, they're entering the malls, they're going to restaurants where I don't see too much of distancing. So why is the biggest fear from school, where there is distancing, where we have actually marked chairs that you will not sit over here, where everybody is in a mask, and that kind of training has happened through the media, through schools, through parents, whoever sending their child is drilling it into them that you have to keep the mask on. So I have small 6-year-olds coming, but their masks do not move out of place. It's really nice, just a sort of retraining of the mind. And again, I mean, if a parent thinks that it's okay to not send them to school, then they need to rethink. That's all I can say. I can only prod them through your channel and say, do send your children to school. I think every school is taking precautions. But again, like I said, if they feel unsafe, then they feel unsafe.
And this also calls for some mental health, issues. With a lot of counseling has been happening for students as well. So I'm sure you would also have some experiences with your students, and how are you dealing with it?
So in our school, we have something called a peer education program. So this group of children from class 9, 10, 11 and 12 are trained to talk to other children. So they're like youth counselors, so to say. And I found that usually everyone finds it easier to talk to their own peers than talk to an adult. So if they are going through any kind of problem, academic, social, emotional, they find it easy to reach out to one of the peer educators and say, I want to talk. And sometimes it may not be an issue which needs a huge resolution or something. It is just by talking about it, you find the solution in the midst of the conversation. We have also had, unfortunately, a lot of tragedies within families when the second wave came. So we started something called grief counseling, where we had a very quick, short-term sort of training for teachers and for children, that they should be able to talk to children who have had losses inside the family, an uncle passing away, a grandparent going away, or a parent being lost to corona. So they were able to, through those various stages, talk about their grief, try and overcome it, because these are griefs which don't really go away. You can't wish it away. That I've had a conversation and now I'm not grieving anymore. But by talking about it, you lighten the burden, so to say. And then there's a community. You're not the only one. You know that so and so has had lost an uncle, so and so has lost a parent. Some have lost both parents. It's been very, very tragic. But I think talking about it and not allowing it to dwell too much has somewhat helped. However, I must admit that there have been some children across the country who have needed more rigorous psychiatric help to come out of this problem.
Now, actually, shifting the focus on to the larger issue, which is of underage driving, very, very prominent in Gurgaon, Delhi, NCR, and in and around. And it seems like it just bursting out of seams. And how far are parents also responsible for it? And as an educationist, what do you want to tell the parents and the students? And how can we just stop this or take some action?
Um, if you ask me who's responsible, it's 100% the parent who's responsible. No parent can turn around and say, my child insisted. I mean, it's like saying my child insisted that he's going to stab himself. You will stop him.
Correct.
So, if a child says, I'm going to drive to school, you say no. What we as educators can do is enforce these rules. So, when my school began 20 years ago, I made it very clear that nobody can drive to school, whether in a scooter or a motorcycle or a car. And I was shocked to know that this was a trend over here. And I was questioned by some parents that my child is always driven. I said, but was he in DPS? Because DPS has just come up. This is not in the previous school. I said, then you go back there. Simple. My rules are very simple. And there were days we had to actually, look out for children outside of the school to see it, because some of them became clever. They would park half a kilometer away and walk down to school. So then they were nabbed. I used to take away their keys. The parent had to come. I had to talk to them and ask them why they are doing this. Because I think you have all your life to drive whatever vehicle you want. Why now? When we have school buses, we have parents driving. So what is this thrill that they have? And one parent was rude enough to ask me how it bothered me. So I told him how it bothered me, because I said, God forbid, but if this child is in an accident, if he hurts himself or he hurts somebody else, he is wearing the school uniform. So nobody will say XYZ of Nirvana country or Sector 30. They'll say XYZ of Delhi Public School caused an accident. So I did not want my school to be named for these things, and I must say, after 4 or 5 years of a lot of struggle, we managed to have some success that nobody, at least this driving, stopped. So after school, what happens? So either you din it into the children. When you talk to children, children are also very pliant, it's how you reach out to them.
Okay.
So you talk about the dangers of driving. You talk about you wait for things to happen. Not stopping you from driving, but when you're at the right age, you're breaking the law of the land. It's not just a school rule. So when that comes across, then we are hopeful that that message reaches a wider audience and even beyond school hours. After school, of course, if they drive, I think it's the parents have to be blamed completely, because why have they given a key? Why have they given the vehicle? And then they must be ready to face the consequences, whatever may happen.
It's so amazing to hear, that you're not mincing words at all.
I
Because
don't believe in mincing.
Absolutely. So coming back to now CBSE guidelines, there have been new guidelines where we are talking about the boards being split into two different parts. So is it there for good, or is this new thing just for 2022? And as an educationist, what do you think about it?
This was something which, because last year everybody thought that there will be no second wave, and things looked fine in February and March. So there was a hope that we would be able to have exams in May and June. But then the wave came, and it was a wave like nobody had anticipated. So a rethink was done, and of course, assessments were done internally, and some marks were taken from the previous years. Now, I think the board wants to be a little more in control. So they're breaking it up into two parts so that, God forbid, if there is a third wave sometime next year, at least this exam in November, December would hold good for some kind of assessment which would be more hands on, not leaving it to chance. Whether it carries on, again, we don't know because this has its own challenges. We don't know whether it will be online, we don't know whether it will be in school. Right now, we're only doing multiple choice questions because that's the way forward. The next set of exams in February, March may be some subjective and some objective. If the exam doesn't happen, then these marks will be considered as the final board marks. I think these are ways of testing and sort of reassessing assessment for that matter. So when things normalize, perhaps some tests can be this way and some can be a proper pen and paper one. Maybe it will be a hybrid of assessments also, many kinds of assessment. The board is also setting up a very different holistic sort of a report card which will not just assess at the end of the year like we were discussing that one exam of 3 hours decides your future for you. Maybe it will be broken up, so we will have some MCQs, we will have some term exams, and then of course the year-end exam, and some weightage will be given to each part of the assessments.
So it's very fluid.
It's very fluid, and I think it's eventually a little child friendly because then they're also saying that the first term will not be carried forward for the second term. So like a semester system. So it will lighten the burden, so to say, on the child also, because some of them really struggle because it becomes quite a burden to do the entire year syllabus, and so breaking it up is probably a little child friendly also.
Yeah. And the last question to you: what has been your most significant learning out of the pandemic?
There are a couple of things. So the first is, when anybody asks me what should I train my child for, we don't know what they'll get into. We don't know what occupation they'll have. We don't know what job they'll get. So I said, even we don't even know the names of those jobs that supposedly exist or will exist 10 years from now. One thing which all educators and parents must teach their child is how to deal with change. Any change. So when a parent comes to me saying that please don't change my child's section because he will be traumatized, I said, there's so many changes. We must tell our child to deal with that change, whether it's a change of a section or a change of a city or a change of a school or a change of curriculum, change of assessment, change of job. Deal with change. Learn to adapt. Anyone who doesn't adapt, we know this from science, from evolution, anyone that doesn't adapt goes extinct. So adaptation is the way forward, so deal with change. My own second personal learning was that, though I was alone for the first 5 months of the pandemic, and there were occasions that I would be actually panic stricken that I'm alone, suppose something happens. And that realization slowly came to me that I can't control Corona, I can't control what's happening outside. What I can control is how I'm going to respond to it. So I chose very consciously that I'm going to be happy. So difficult, not easy, but when the mind is a very strong organ, it's not even an organ, but it's a very strong thing. So you tell yourself that I choose to be happy. And there were days I would get up and I would dress up knowing I'm not even going to reach my corridor. But I will dress up and sit and take a class or address an assembly because it will make me feel better about myself. And you find little nuances of happiness in little things, writing, singing if you can, playing an instrument, doing things which I hadn't done for ages. I hadn't done embroidery in ages, years, decades. I got back to embroidery. So there's little things to find joy around you. I think that has been my biggest learning because we took a lot for granted, and the pandemic brought into focus that what we were probably focusing too much on was very nebulous, and true happiness lies within you, and you can search it and find it.
How lovely is that? Thank you so much, Aditi ji, for joining us.
Thank you. It's lovely talking to you.
Same here.